Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha patitanam pavnebhyo vaishnavibhyo namo namaha. Hare Krishna. I'd like to welcome everyone for our discussion on this very, very critical and important topic of reading and hearing Srila Prabhupada's books every day. Its importance in our personal spiritual lives and its crucial role in guiding, nurturing, protecting ISKCON for the next hundreds and thousands of years. Today, for our conversation, I invite a personality who has been an inspiration in the lives of many, many devotees to encourage them to read and hear Srila Prabhupada's books every day. He also happens to be an advisor to the Ministry of Education on this effort that we are undertaking in creating a foundation around Srila Prabhupada's books. His Holiness Kesava Bharati Maharaj. Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you so much
Hare Krishna
for giving us the time.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much for asking me. My obeisances to all the devotees who are listening. A special felt obeisances to His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, who is my life and soul, and whose books are my life and soul, and have been my life and soul ever since I touched them. I was living on the top of a mountain in 1972, and I had collected a very small library of books on self-improvement or spiritual subject matters, and I was working my way systematically through them. And by fate, by spiritual destiny, within a week of each other, I received from two different persons separately, from very unlikely places, two of Srila Prabhupada's books and a magazine, Back to Godhead magazine. And when I got one of them from my landlady. Her name was Hope. She was a 70-year-old Christian mystic living on top of this mountain of about 100 people in the village. And she was there for the same reason I was, to escape the madding crowd, as it said. And she had gone down off the mountain to shop for provisions, because there wasn't hardly any stores and things like that in this small place. And while she was shopping, she was approached in 1972 in a very small town by a devotee in the parking lot. And she wasn't interested in what he had to offer, because she was a mystic Christian and fully convinced and fully committed to her path. But even though she had only met me once or twice, I think, she thought of me. And she thought that I might be interested. Very interesting, isn't it?
Yes.
Here's a committed Christian. She thought of me, and she purchased the books just for me. And she didn't ask me any money for them. She knew I was poor at the time. And she brought it right to my door. And I opened the door. I said, "Oh, Hope." And she said, "I think these are for you." So I took those books. It was the Ishopanishad and a Back to Godhead magazine. And I put it at the end of the shelf of the other books without even looking at them, because I was very dedicated to going through all of these books systematically. And about 5 to 7 days later, my wife at the time, who turned out to be Kolini Dasi, a great saintly person in our movement, she went with her friend to Mexico for a vacation, because I had gone with my friend to Europe for a vacation. And she was in the interior of Mexico, in the center part, looking for some kind of cultural places to visit. And she went into a used bookstore, and there was one book in the English language, Bhagavad Gita as it is, the first purple abridged version by Macmillan, Collier Macmillan. So I took that book. I said, "Thank you very much, dear." And I put it next to the other one that I had just received without looking at it. I already had one Bhagavad Gita on my shelf, Christopher Isherwood's poem. You couldn't understand what he was talking about, actually. And I think 2 or 3 nights later, I was working a night shift just to make ends meet. And I took those 2 books, put them in a bag, went to work. And in the middle of the night or very early morning, just before the sun came up, there was light in the sky, but it was still, dark, or nobody was around. This is before people got up. I took those 2 books out and I looked at them for the first time carefully, and they were from the same author. Now, the chances of that happening are practically zero.
Very little, yes.
If a turtle had stuck his head, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean through a knothole in a board that happened to be floating there, that's the chances of this happening. And tears started flowing from my eyes, and my body shook, and my hair stood up. And I had been offering prayers for quite some time for guidance, because I knew that God existed, but there was none of the books that I was reading were clear about the identity of God, the conception of God concretely, more than some vague, supreme something. So I started looking through the book, and I came to, I was just flipping through it, just reading at random. And I came to the second chapter, the 9th chapter, the 2nd verse. And I came to this statement at the end of the purport. All the purports weren't there, of course. It was the abridged version. And Prabhupada says, when one's heart is cleared of all nonsense, then one can understand what God is. Thus, the process of devotional service, of Krishna consciousness, is the king of all education and the king of all confidential knowledge. It is the purest form of religion, and it can be executed joyfully without difficulty. Therefore, one should adopt it. And I shut the book. And I was a devotee. I was a devotee. So from that day on, I started reading that book out loud to whoever I came in contact with. That was 1970. It was
quite an intense first experience, Maharaj.
Well, that's not the end of the story. I went up to where we lived, and I got my friend out of bed, Clint. We were childhood friends, and we always talked about, what we thought were spiritual subjects. We didn't know what we were talking about, actually, like typical young men in those days. And I said, Clint, what just happened to me was an incredible experience. I think we should search out more information about this. Now, when I first read that book, the Bhagavad Gita, the author, who I didn't know who it was, because on the cover, the word Prabhupada was not there. It was A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, and Ishopanishad also, the word Prabhupada was not there. It was the old ISKCON Press version, pink hardback cover. And so we decided, we got the magazine out and looked for an address. We were living at the time about 70 miles from Los Angeles.
Yes.
And on the cover of the magazine, the Los Angeles temple was billed as the world headquarters. So we thought that would be a good place to go, but we didn't like Los Angeles for many reasons. We liked San Francisco because we were Northern California boys. So we drove about 300 to 400 miles out of our way to San Francisco. We got to the address, Frederick Street, and it was boarded up. It was a little storefront. It was once a laundromat or something like that. And that was the temple before. So it was a dead end. And I was disappointed, but determined. I looked down the street, down Stanton Street, and there was a devotee passing out magazines. So I ran up to him. Hare Krishna, I said. He said, Hare Krishna. Nobody comes up and runs up to you and says Hare Krishna in those days. He said, oh, and I was carrying that Bhagavad Gita in my hand. And he said, oh, you must have come to hear Srila Prabhupada speak tonight. And I said, what do you mean? Because I'd never heard the term. He said, oh, that book you're carrying, the author of that book, he just arrived today in San Francisco.
Oh, glory Jai.
He hasn't been here for 2 years, and he won't be here again. And he didn't come again until 1974 for Rath Yatra. So the same thing happened to me. Tears came flowing out of my eyes, and I was shaking. They had to kind of pour me into the car, and they took me to the temple. It had moved, of course, to Valencia Street and another part of town. And when I walked into the temple, I just took one breath, and it's like I had never not been there. And within a few hours, I was sitting in front of Prabhupada at a program in the Hall of Flowers in Golden Gate Park. And what can I say? I met my spiritual master, and I surrendered to him immediately. And I never left, and I never looked back. And ever since then, I've been painfully aware, blissfully, painfully aware of how important Srila Prabhupada's books are. And now, all these years later, after having read Prabhupada's books many times, and I think many of you may know, or some of you at least may know, that I've been reading his books out loud for the last 7 years, every day, out loud, for at least an hour or more, with whoever happened to be around. And about almost 3 years ago, I started reading them live stream on Facebook. And recently they were all of the videos that I've made were put on YouTube, which is more easily accessible. And yeah, there's more than 730 now, I think. Because I do this every day. Except for rare days, I've done it every day for the last 3 years. And I have this deep-seated realization based on Srila Prabhupada's words and his desires. So sometimes if we might hear, well, what is the role that Prabhupada's books play in our Krishna consciousness? Is it necessary to read his books? But if you read the books, or if you actually are hearing them, it's one thing to, let the words come into your mind. But if you've actually heard them, what was it that Jesus once said? Let those who have ears hear. What's the difference? Everyone has ears. Could we shut these windows? There's some construction going on outside. I want to shut the windows. Sorry for the disturbance. So now, fast forward 48 years later, and here we are And the Kali Yuga is unfolding, just like the Srimad Bhagavatam explains it will. And the qualities of the leadership, the confusion, the chaos. Kali means quarrel. So the quarrelsome nature of the Kali Yuga is becoming in front of our eyes, stronger and stronger, to the point at which argument is becoming the rule of law practically all over the world, in every country, in every group of people. They're fighting over race, they're fighting over gender, they're fighting over politics, they're fighting over economic systems, they're fighting over political systems. This is Kali Yuga. So everything that's happened, I measure against what I've heard from Srila Prabhupada's books. And as a result, the faith that I have in Srila Prabhupada's books has become unflinching and extremely powerful. I'm quoting now a translation from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, which I'm reading right now, by the way, in my daily readings of Srila Prabhupada's books. This is verse 277 and 278 of the Madhya Lila, 25th chapter, the last chapter of the Madhya Lila. The pastimes of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu are full of nectar, and the pastimes of Lord Krishna are like camphor. When one mixes these, they taste very sweet. By the mercy of the pure devotees, whoever tastes them can understand the depths of that sweetness. Men become strong and stout by eating sufficient grains, but the devotee who simply eats ordinary grains but does not taste the transcendental pastimes of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Krishna gradually becomes weak and falls down from the transcendental position. However, if one drinks but a drop of the nectar of Krishna's pastimes, his body and mind begin to bloom, and he begins to laugh, sing, and dance. Purport. All the devotees connected with the Krishna consciousness movement must read all the books that have been translated, parentheses, the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, and others. Otherwise, after some time, they will simply eat, sleep, and fall down from their position. Thus, they will miss the opportunity to attain an eternal, blissful life of transcendental pleasure. So, my question to everyone who is asking the question, how important it is, or do we need to read Srila Prabhupada's books to advance in spiritual life? I would say, what else is there that will give us the opportunity to advance in spiritual life, to taste eternal blissful life of transcendental pleasure?
Because on that note, I'm inspired to ask you a question because you gave me a lead. Maharaj, you mentioned that you're seeing Kali Yuga unfold, and by your readings and what you're seeing in the world, your faith in Srila Prabhupada's words is just growing more and more. You just read one paragraph, actually the translation and then the purport, very powerful, very powerful. In your 48 years of associating with ISKCON, have you seen this manifest? Just because devotees may not be hearing or reading?
Well, of course, I've watched it with my own eyes. I was one of the assistants to a couple of major players in our movement from the beginning, Bhagawan Das. And when I joined him, he was an avid reader of the books. He was giving fantastic classes, but then he got overwhelmed by management and by other things. And I watched him read a little less, a little less, a little less, before he was the first one up and the last one to bed every day. And he was setting a good example in many ways and bringing together and creating a family atmosphere, which was very wonderful. And but as I saw him reading the books less and less, I saw with my own eyes that he was changing in the wrong direction.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, before he actually left the movement, there were 5 or 6 of us who came together, his so-called generals, so to speak. You know, Indadumna Maharaj, Shiva Maharaj, myself, Sundararup, and a couple of others. And we were in charge of the different countries that comprised his zone. And we knew something was happening, something wrong, but we didn't know what it was. And so we all had a clandestine meeting. Nobody knew that we were going to come together in the place where he was and meet. Nobody knew. And we walked into his room all together, unannounced, without him knowing. And we just put it to him. Okay, what's going on? We know you very well. Something's happening. And anyway, there was a long conversation. And at the end of the day, he said he couldn't really hear what we were saying because he had always been a leader in the movement, more or less. And the next day or the day after, he left, got on a plane and left with a woman. So I have seen with my own eyes and my own ears. See, when I said that my faith is increased, it's because I'm looking at the world through the lens of the knowledge in Prabhupada's books. And I've gone through many changes myself. I've had to make many adjustments, internal adjustments, in order to pass through conflict and, you know, even personal difficulties. And this is the way. You know, it is the way of tempering steel. You put steel under tremendous heat, and the hotter the heat, the stronger the temper of the steel. So, like I said, you know, I'm watching the the history of the world unfold, and it's exactly like it's described in the 12th canto of the Bhagavatam. It's exactly, you know, all the qualities. If you don't have money, you can't get education or justice. Marriage is done just by agreement. There's no depth. There's no spiritual dimension. It's just for sensual gratification. Greed has become rampant. The leaders have become plunderers. They don't care about the people. All they care about is their own power. So as I read, you have to assimilate the books into your own character. You know, when you read the Bhagavad Gita, for instance, which, by the way, we should never stop reading. There's one quote from Prabhupada's book that says, you should never stop reading the Bhagavad Gita. Even if you've read all 18 chapters, you should continue to read them again and again, because the nature of transcendental literature is that it's nectar. It's transcendental nectar. It's all through the books. And when we get to the Chaitanya Charitamrita, we hear about the loving exchanges between Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his eternal associates. We hear
Maharaj, before we go there, I want to please ask you a few questions with your permission.
Please.
You gave an anecdote which is almost like a very strong warning. I mean, if it can happen to such a senior person and who's always engaged, what to say of others who may not be so much engaged, especially managers and leaders. So I take that as a very strong warning for leaders and managers, that irrespective of how much service there may be and how much service we're trying to expand for ourselves, but we can never compromise the reading of
We should never be
God's
doing
books.
anything to expand anything for ourselves. Devotional service means we're doing it for the pleasure of Krishna.
Yes. And that was the second aspect I wanted to come to. You also mentioned that in your own personal life also you notice that there are many changes, if I may use the word transformations, positive transformations through the whole cycle of life. Maharaj, if it is, at the end, I wouldn't say at the end, but it's such an important part of one's personal life to be able to see through the scriptures. Much unlike others may say, it's needed for knowledge, it's needed for preachers, but sometimes it's just needed to maintain one's sanity in this world, to be able to make sense out of it. And the only way one can make sense out of it is when one looks through the eyes of the Bhaktivedanta purports. If it is all right, I want you to share something from your personal life over the last 48 years, something that you're okay to share with us that changed.
Well, it's obvious. Chapter 13, verse 8 to 12, Bhagavad Gita. This is what knowledge is: humility, pridelessness, nonviolence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of the objects of sense gratification, absence of false ego, the perception of the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease, detachment, freedom from entanglement with children, wife, home, and the rest, even-mindedness amid pleasant and unpleasant events, constant and unalloyed devotion to me, that's Krishna, aspiring to live in a solitary place, detachment from the general mass of people, accepting the importance of self-realization and philosophical search for the absolute truth. All these I declare to be knowledge, and besides this, whatever they may be, is ignorance. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada says, the process of knowledge is sometimes misunderstood by less intelligent men as being the interaction of the field of activity. But actually, this is the real process of knowledge. If one accepts this process, then the possibility of approaching the absolute truth exists. This is not the interaction of the 24 elements as described before. This is actually the means to get out of the entanglement of those elements.
Very powerful statement. Very powerful statement. It
So
is,
my point
as
is
we use the word, transcendental. Yeah.
My point is this, that when we hear the prayer that we say every day, most of us, Om Jnana Timidandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So to learn these books means to see, Chakshur means to see through the eyes of knowledge. And this is not information content that you acquire and then look out at the world and judge what is right and wrong. That's part of it. But we have to apply to our own selves. And this is what I see lacking. And that's why the taste is not coming. There's another verse. I think it's chapter...
Maharaj, before you go to the verse, please tell me, why is it lacking? I mean, we're reading the same.
Because the material energy is very powerful. It's more powerful than all of us put together. Even Lord Brahma had a slip before he heard the Srimad Bhagavatam. He ran after his daughter. Nothing happened, but he just thought of it. and his sons very respectfully approached him and corrected him.
Yes, yes.
So
Maharaj, there is the process. There are so many processes of devotional service, right? There are the 9 processes, and then there is also the 9 stages till one reaches Krishna Prema. Where do you place hearing? I mean, we know that Shravanam is the first step, but where do you place hearing?
Hearing, according to Sanatana Goswami, the process of hearing is the most important, in the sense that you won't know how to perform the other methods of devotional service, the different angas of devotional service, without properly and sufficiently hearing. It means the hearing process is meant to be done progressively, with more and more devotion, with more and more faith. If you're not hearing and you're influenced by the modes of nature, which everyone is, the Bhagavad Gita says, no one from Brahma down to the ant is not influenced by the modes of material nature. We're all of us are bound by the modes of material nature.
So it's not a stepping stone. And what do you say to devotees who say, I've read the Bhagavad Gita a few times, I've read the Srimad Bhagavatam, I've read the Chaitanya Charitamrita, or I'm reading it, it's the same thing, I'm hearing the same message. When that mentality arises in a heart, you alluded to it earlier, when you read that that Bhagavad Gita must be read again and again. But what do you say to such devotees?
The reason is because this knowledge is transcendental. It's not material knowledge. I think we should go to the verse that I was thinking about. I think
yes,
it's 4, chapter 4, verse 38, I think. Yes. In this world, there is nothing so sublime and pure as transcendental knowledge. Such knowledge is the mature fruit of all mysticism, and one who has become accomplished in the practice of devotional service enjoys this knowledge within himself in due course of time. So this knowledge is not academic. You cannot understand it by an academic approach, by intellectual gymnastics, by memorization, and it has to be, you have to be chosen by Krishna.
You touch on a point. You touch a point about academic approach and
academic approach means
memorization.
Academic approach, it means you learn a subject, you pass tests, examinations, you get letters after your name, and you get position and authority and all these things. But there's no consideration, or very little consideration, as to your morals, as to your moral fiber and your spiritual character.
The 26 that you just described a little while ago,
those are that's knowledge.
Yes.
The qualities are in the beginning. The divine qualities of the soul are described in the 16th chapter, in the beginning of the 16th chapter, divine and demoniac natures.
Maharaj, there's this programs that we have within ISKCON that we encourage devotees to participate in. Prabhupada himself encouraged devotees to study and then read and then take a Bhakti Shastri, a Bhakti Vaibhava, and so on and so forth. In light of what you just said, how are they different, and what should be one's attitude and approach to such programs?
You have to apply the knowledge to yourself. You have to make the goal of the knowledge to awaken the qualities that are given in the Gita, in the beginning of the 16th chapter, and the knowledge that we just read, the 18 items of knowledge. And it's very simple. At the end of that purport to those verses, Prabhupada says, knowledge begins with humility. Not only does it begin with humility, but it ends with humility. Because,
it's sustained through humility throughout.
yes, but my point is that humility, dainya, means utter humility. That's complete humility. And it is Sanatana Goswami describes it in the purports to his Digdarshini commentary on the Brihad Bhagavatamrita. He explains it to be the essential prerequisite for attaining Krishna prema, love of God, or awakening our love of God. And the mutual cause and effectual relationship between the two is so intimate that one cannot have, they're the same.
One. Yes,
One
yes.
cannot have one without the other.
Without the other.
You cannot have dainya without prema. You cannot have prema without dainya.
Yes.
So this is the verse, Nayam Atma Pravachanena Labhyo Namedasa Sa Bahuna Shutena Yam Evaisha Vrinute Tena Labhyas Tasyaisha Atma Vivrinute Tanum Swam. The Supreme Lord is not obtained by expert explanations, by vast intelligence, or even by much hearing. He is obtained only by one. He himself is chosen. He is obtained only by one whom he himself chooses. In such a person, he manifests his own form. So the goal of Krishna consciousness is not just to keep oneself clean of material infection and all those things, or to become comfortable and peaceful and happy. It's meant to awaken our love for God.
Yes.
And for his satisfaction, for his pleasure. So unless we assimilate this knowledge, and there's only one way to assimilate the knowledge, according to the books, and that is by hearing. Therefore, you can say that the hearing is most important, but my realization is that the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, which, by the way, I assisted the editing of that book, and I was trained by Jayadvaita Maharaj during that process, and hearing means the heart changes. Hearing means it's not a learning process. It is a learning process, but it's more than a learning process. As one hears, one's desire, one's faith increases if one's actually hearing. If you're not hearing, then after you've read the Gita once or twice, you need to move on to something else. But these books are layered with realization, and you can't hear it all at once. You have to hear it again and again. And while you're doing that, you have to serve. So therefore, Sanatana Goswami makes the point that in the beginning, the hearing is the most important thing, because you can't know what to do until you've heard. But then when you hear, and then what? You explain it to others. That's kirtan. So we have an idea that kirtan means congregational and chanting Hare Krishna with a bunch of devotees with instruments and singing. But the thing is, the reading of the books out loud is also sankirtan.
Yes.
And if you have problem keeping your mind focused, if you have problem getting a taste, then I highly recommend that you read the books to yourself, even when you're by yourself, out loud, because there's something about the sound of one's voice. Everyone likes the sound of his own voice or his name. Krishna, he likes the sound of his name. That's why he asks us to chant his name constantly. So if we actually hear these books out loud to ourselves, we will change. And as you change, you see for yourself that the books are unlimited. The depth of knowledge is unlimited. Devotees who think that Prabhupada only gave us the beginning things, and I have to go on to some other older gentleman devotee, preferably Indian, who will never fall down in order to hear and taste a Rasika devotee. But Prabhupada was the greatest Rasika devotee ever to walk the planet, because he's the only one who could powerful enough to awaken the Krishna consciousness, the real Krishna consciousness, all through the world. No one has done it. No one will ever do it again for the first time. Therefore, we need the association of Srila Prabhupada. We need the association of the personalities that are described in the book. And they're not just described in the book, they're there. In the end of in the first canto of the Bhagavatam, Prabhupada says, now Narada Muni has kindly appeared.
Yes.
Huh? Kindly appeared. So now I just finished reading the 11th, I'm in the process of reading the 11th chapter of the Madhya Lila, when Lord Chaitanya comes back from his tour of South India, and all the devotees come to see him. They come from Bengal, the ones that are there in Puri, and he has the most loving exchanges with every single one of them.
Yes.
In such a way that you just swim in nectar. And anybody who says, okay, I've heard that, let's go on. I've heard it again and again and again. Not only do I never get tired of it, I relish it more and more and more. Therefore, if that's not happening to you, then you're not hearing. You're not hearing with the proper mentality, with the proper sense, with the proper spirit, submissively. I'll read you another thing. I have to go to the Bhagavatam, so I have to find this. Just give me 1 second. You can still see and hear me, right? I'm on another page in my computer. I'm looking for something now. Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Lila, chapter 1, verse 19. This is the problem. You're asking what the problem is. This is the problem. Everything that surrounds us is becoming less and less submissive. Everyone is becoming more and more argumentative. The internet age has brought so many people into the realm of thinking that they know and no one else does. Therefore, no one's hearing from each other. Therefore, they can't agree. Therefore, there's no oneness. Here is Srila Prabhupada discussing this. I hope I'm in the right place. Wait. Oh no, I'm in the wrong place. Sorry. That's the wrong verse.
There's one question which is really going on in my mind, Maharaj. When you're ready, I want to ask you that because something that you spoke.
Let's read this verse. Yes. The personality of Godhead, the entire material manifestation, develops and exists because the Supreme Personality of Godhead enters it as Paramatma, or the Super Soul. The personality of Godhead, in his all-pervading feature of the Paramatma, enters every entity from the biggest to the most minute. His existence can be realized by one who has the single qualification of submissiveness and who thereby becomes a surrendered soul. The development of submissiveness is the cause of proportionate spiritual realization, by which one can ultimately meet the Supreme Lord in person as a man meets another man face to face.
Such a glorious ambition, glorious goal, and to be able to meet the Supreme Lord face to face.
So let's talk about initiation. let's talk about,
Okay.
we've come to the movement, and we those of us who became serious, we became initiated. What is initiation? I just read it in the, I just heard it, rather, in a room conversation. Srila Prabhupada is having his devotees read his books out loud. Listen to Prabhupada's audio, his audio recordings, his room conversations, his lectures. He says over and over and again, he wants devotees to read the books out loud to him and the other devotees. So he was reading from the 19th chapter about the Bhakti Lata Bij. And he said that the Bhakti Lata Bij is given to the devotee at the time of initiation. But we know that Krishna Prema is already there in the heart of every living being. And he quoted that in that purport. He quoted Sanatana Goswami, Madhya Lila, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu preaching to Sanatana Goswami, chapter 22, verses 107 and 108. Yeah? And there he says that the instructions that are given by the spiritual master, the following of which awakens love of Godhead, that is the Bhakti Lata Bij. And then when you hear and water that Bhakti Lata Bij by hearing the pastimes of Krishna and the instructions from Krishna and all of the pure devotees of Krishna given in the Shastra, then that waters the Bhakti Lata Bij. And then the pure love of God that is already there comes out. So if you want Krishna, if you want to be free from material entanglement and suffering, Prabhupada said, the only thing I'm asking you to give up is your suffering. That's all you have to give up. You can stay right where you are. But Lord Chaitanya is inquiring from Ramananda Roy, talks about Varnashram. What is the perfection of life? Varnashram, no, that's external. What more? Varnashram for the pleasure of Krishna, that's still external. What more? Renunciation with knowledge, renunciation like that. Finally, he gets to that verse in the 10th canto, the prayers by Lord Brahma, where he says, you just stay where you are. Here, give up your speculation about what is true and not, and hear from the authorized sources again and again. Stay in the same place, and you will get love of God. And from there, the conversation is accepted by Lord Chaitanya. So what are we in? What are you in this for? What do we want? Are we looking for a cushy situation? Are we looking for power? Are we looking for influence? Are we looking for followers? Nadanam, najanam, kundrim, kavitam va, jagadish kamaye, mama janmani. It's right there. It's there in every page. It's there in every verse. It's there in every syllable. Sanatana Goswami, Rupa Goswami, Namastaka, in the holy name, it's there in every syllable. It's the supreme combination of syllables. Prabhupada said every syllable of the Bhagavatam is transcendental and pregnant with spiritual understanding and knowledge and bliss. So if you're giving up on hearing Prabhupada's books, it means you have ulterior motives. You have material desires that are overpowering your desire to advance in spiritual life. So what I can say personally, you asked me the question, I've overcome every difficulty you can by this one process of hearing submissively with the desire to awaken my Krishna consciousness and give pleasure to Srila Prabhupada. Why? Because Prabhupada said, the only thing that has disappointed me is that my devotees are not reading my books. The only disappointment that I have is that my devotees are not reading my books. So if you're honest, if you're free from envy, nirmatsaranam satam, if you're free from envy and if you're honest, then you must hear. And when you do hear, there's nothing else to hear. You will lose your interest in hearing anything else. Or if you do hear other things, it will be for the purpose of gaining knowledge to preach and how to, as perfectly as possible, express it to people who are conditioned in different ways.
Maharaj, that means a lot. 5 decades of devotional service, and in the end, or you're sharing with us that every difficulty that you faced, you were able to overcome from hearing. You also mentioned you saw with your own eyes how devotees who were, when taking shelter of Srila Prabhupada's books, were bringing glory, they could not sustain themselves when they stopped hearing. And you described in great detail what hearing really means. You also distinguished in this conversation how we could sometimes get carried away with academic orientation towards hearing, but that becomes obvious when we start losing interest in hearing again.
And how does that begin? How does that start of interest you start losing when you become what? Argumentative.
Yes.
Tarkopatisam shutibir vivina. The Muni has to know more than everyone else, and all the Munis are arguing back and forth because everyone has to have a new idea, the best idea.
Right.
And you can't but tarkopatisam. Yena Mahajano, Yenagata Sapanta. You have to submit yourself to the instructions and the association and the company of the Mahajans and those who are actually following the Mahajans. You will stop arguing for argument's sake, and you will only argue if you can help glorify the Supreme Lord and make a person or help a person come to that understanding.
Yes, and you also described that how the Supreme Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself accepted that in the conversation with Sri Ramananda Roy, that okay, now we can talk more. Now we're at the point where I'm ready to hear and go ahead. Maharaj, it's been a very, very valuable conversation today. I would say you've touched upon so many points, and on an individual level, on a managerial level, for the society, the right mood, and it's something that we all need to take very seriously. In order to do this, it's not a one-day effort. It's not a one-week effort. We're having a Shravanam week. The Shravanam week is just to remind devotees, but it's something that we have to do every day. Now, Maharaj, 48 years, 7 years you mentioned you're reading every day. 3 years you're also publishing, recording. By the way, we are also publishing your recordings on the Ministry of Education, which we're grateful to you for. And how do you see moving forward? I mean, what is your personal life's aim now in your service to Srila Prabhupada?
My aim to my service Srila Prabhupada, I was talking to my best friend, Vaisheshika Prabhu. We're like that. We were sitting on his couch together in his living room, in his home in Burlingame. And we were trying to understand how to catch the minds about this. And one of us, I don't remember which, he doesn't remember either. One of us said, be a sage. And the other one said, page by page. And we looked at each other, that was it, that's it. Be a sage page by page. And we started calculating the number of pages you would have to read the whole Bhagavatam in a year, or 2 years, or 3 years, or like that. And we got into a little bit of making goals and trying to read progressively, and so on and so forth. So I can say that at the end, my goal is to record all of Prabhupada's major works and publish them as audiobooks by the BBT. That's my legacy service for Srila Prabhupada. I've been reading these books out loud for 48 years, practically the whole time. And now I'm going to put it down. I'll give you a sample. I think you'll be able to hear it. I hope.
Let's see if I can, yes.
Yeah, let's see if you can hear it. This is a sample of what I'm talking about.
And while you're pulling it out, I remind all the viewers that you can access this on YouTube, and you can also access the complete Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam on the Ministry of Education website, where you can track your progress.
Yes, now what I'm reading to you now is a recording that is being edited that will be, hopefully by Gaur Purnim, published or released as an audiobook. And I'm looking for Ancha. Yes, this is Ancha Leela. Chapter 1. Ready?
Yes, Maharaj.
Ancha Leela, Chapter 1. Srila Rupa Goswami's second meeting with the Lord. A summary of the first chapter is given by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur in his Amrita Pravaha Bhasha as follows. When Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu returned to Jagannath Puri from Vrindavan, all his devotees from other parts of India, upon receiving the auspicious news, came to Purushottam Kshetra, or Jagannath Puri. Shivananda Sen took a dog with him and even paid fees for it to cross the river. One night, however, the dog could not get any food and therefore went directly to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu at Jagannath Puri. The next day, when Shivananda and his party reached Jagannath Puri, Shivananda saw the dog eating some coconut pulp offered to it by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. After this incident, the dog was liberated and went back home, back to Godhead. Meanwhile, Srila Rupa Goswami reached Bengal after returning from Vrindavan. Although he could not follow the Bengali devotees, after some time, he also came to Jagannath Puri, where he stayed with Haridas Thakur. Srila Rupa Goswami composed an important verse beginning with the words Priyak Soyam, and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu relished it very much. One day, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Ramananda Roy, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, and others went to the place of Haridas Thakur and heard some of the verses Rupa Goswami had composed for his books, Lalita Madhava and Vidagdha Madhava. After examining the manuscripts of these books, Ramananda Roy approved and appreciated them very much. After the period of Chaturmasya, all the devotees who had come from Bengal returned to their homes. Srila Rupa Goswami, however, remained at Jagannath Puri for some time. Text 1.
Thank you, Maharaj.
My respectful obeisances to Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu,
Yes.
by whose mercy even a lame man can cross over a mountain and a dumb man recite Vedic literature. Text 2. My path is very difficult. I am blind, and my feet are slipping again and again. Therefore may the saints help me by granting me the stick of their mercy as my support. Text 3 and 4. I pray to the lotus feet of the six Goswamis, Sri Rupa, Sanatan, Bhatta Raghunath, Sri Jiva, Gopal Bhatta, and Dasa Raghunath, so that all the impediments to my writing this literature will be annihilated and my real desire will be fulfilled. Purport. If one wants to benefit the entire world, he will certainly find persons like hogs and pigs who will put forward many impediments. That is natural. But if a devotee seeks shelter at the lotus feet of the six Goswamis, the merciful Goswamis will certainly give the Lord's servitor all protection. It is not astonishing that impediments are placed before those who are spreading the Krishna consciousness movement all over the world. Nevertheless, if we stick to the lotus feet of the 6 Goswamis and pray for their mercy, all impediments will be annihilated, and the transcendental devotional desire to serve the Supreme Lord will be fulfilled.
That's it. That's a sample.
You've given us hope, Maharaj. You've given us hope with what you spoke, and you've given us hope with just what you recited from, Chaitanya Charitamrita, which is to seek shelter at the feet of the 6 Goswamis. Maharaj, I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for you.
The last time I talked to Vaisheshika Prabhu about this, he told me, this will be the next big thing for spreading Krishna consciousness, the audiobooks, because it pulls together the knowledge and the process of hearing from a person who has a taste.
Yes.
You have to get a taste. That's the essence of what I'm trying to say. If you don't get a taste, and if you don't have a taste, go on hearing. And your heart will be purified by the hearing. Namaparada yuktanam namam evya yagam aham. The chanting of the holy name of the Lord, chanting of Srimad Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, Bhagavad Gita, they're the same. They are for persons who are offenders. Because if you keep chanting again and again, they are the only things that are more powerful enough to remove your offenses and give you the taste. Never stop hearing Srila Prabhupada's books every day. And if you do, you will get the taste. And when you get the taste, you will lose your taste for material affection and material pleasure. And you will go back to Godhead in this life while you're still in your body. Hare Krishna.
We take that, may the words come true for all of us, hearing it from a sadhu, hearing it from somebody who has the taste, given his life for reading Prabhupada's books, and from your experience, your life, you claim for this to happen. Maharaj, I'm so grateful for your time today. Thank you so very much. I mean, I'm moved. I'm sure many of us will be very, very inspired to hear what you just said. And this conversation has been very valuable. And I hope that we can have more such conversations as time evolves, for you to keep reminding us how important it is to read Prabhupada's books every day. All glories to Srila Prabhupada, and all glories to Srila Prabhupada's transcendental books and his Bhaktivedanta purports, and to those devotees who hear them and recite them every day.
And relish them. I am your servant.
Maharaj, and I'm yours in this service.
Hare
All
Krishna.
glories to Prabhupada. Thank you, Maharaj. Hare Krishna.
Jai, glories to Prabhupada. Hare Bol.
Hare Krishna.